Hey everyone, my guest on this episode is Dr. Roberto Kraenkel. He is a physicist at Sao Paulo State University in Brazil. He does work in epidemiological modeling, which brought him into doing work on the pandemic. We discuss the situation as a whole in Brazil, as it has been over the past year, and the dire state of Brazil that is presently at hand. Now, I'm going to run over something before I bring you the conversation that I had with Roberto. At this time, Brazil is at its worst point in the pandemic, which we're now over a year into. The cases have ramped up drastically and are still rising, and right now they presently have 2,000 to 3,000 deaths per day. That's how things have been in Brazil over the course of the last week or so. And of course, those deaths and cases are varying quite a bit from place to place. Brazil is a very large country with an array of very different states. But for a country that hasn't really been doing very well at all in dealing with the coronavirus, this is rather dark. There's a news story that Roberto brings up at the very end of our discussion that is pretty telling. There's places in Brazil now where people are waiting 5 to 6 hours in line just to deal with death registrations. Pretty gloomy. And even for how large those some figures are of deaths and cases now in Brazil, on the international stage, still per capita, those numbers are dwarfed by what is occurring right now in Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Czech Republic. The worst part of the pandemic altogether was only 2 months ago, and things have gone down, thankfully, back in February, but worldwide it's back up again. As discussed on this episode, the new variants seem to be playing a large role in the vaccine rollout. As miraculous as these vaccines are, how fast we got them, how great they've been working, if we got a vaccine that is half as good and it took double the time, that would still be absolutely amazing. But I feel there's some sort of disconnect going on right now, and has been for some time. I think even before the vaccines came into play, but ever since then, I felt that ever since the beginning of November, I hear the same sort of wishful thinking day after day. Well, the vaccine is here. It'll be over soon. 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 Well, 5 months of that, it's been pretty daunting and a little bit obnoxious. There's no reason to be really doubtful of the vaccines, and as I mentioned, things are working amazingly well, but it's not over. And as far as things have been from Christmas until now, it's the worst point yet. And the risk at hand, as we're seeing in Brazil and Eastern Europe, is considerable. As the pandemic has gone on, I'm not exactly sure what is occurring. Something has allowed people to become more and more accustomed to their surroundings. And maybe there's more to it than this, and I'm off, and I'm sure I am in this analysis, if you can even call it that. But it reminds me of how people feel towards nuclear arms. It has been a massive risk hanging over our head, well before I was on this planet, and nobody really thinks about it much. I think of all the concern that grows and grows and grows towards climate change now, which is something I'm very concerned about and is a large issue, but climate change is often brought up in the context of an existential threat. Well, if it's it's an existential threat, which I'd say is a reasonable claim, then your base level of concern should be existential threats. But for many, it is often just the one and doesn't expand well beyond that. Then, for whatever reason, that one existential threat stays in the forefront of minds, and the other ones get pushed back, even if they are as severe. Now, important, I'm not trying to make the point that the pandemic is an existential threat right now, or really run anything along those lines. Please, if you're trying to make some sort of connection there, just please push that aside. What I'm trying to say is that it is the same principle of how it gets into the back of somebody's mind to the point where they're not thinking about it anymore. With nuclear weapons, the rate of how much that is an issue is going to fluctuate depending on the stability of the world and the conflicts between different countries. But the level of concern there stays quite static, that being rather low. It has been a problem for so long that it gets primarily ignored. And it seems like the concern with the pandemic has been on a downward slope, even as the issue with the pandemic has been on an upward slope. Now, I want to bring some things to scale, just to try to hopefully spark in someone's mind as to what is going on right now. Now, again, too, as I'm sure with the way some might react to comparisons made, or people don't always like the way something's framed, they react with their limbic system more than the rest of their brain, so they might not like what I had to say comparing the disconnect with the nuclear arms threat, or what I said about climate change. So hopefully I don't have someone using their knee-jerk emotive response with me attempting to bring some things to scale here. So at the height of the last wave in the pandemic, we had 17,000 deaths per day. Cancer deaths internationally are around 26,000. So that's all of cancer worldwide. Whereas COVID, it's coming and going, ebbing and flowing. And in some places, they have it under control. Some places, it's the bulk of the brunt being born in very particular places, where cancer is going to be more evenly spread across. Now, again, too, I shouldn't have to lay this out. It should be obvious. I don't think that the deaths from cancer and COVID are all the same thing. These are all different things, and I'm probably just going to have to say the reminder over and over again. So often I see things being taken out of context, and the proclivity that is out there for people to just contort and react immediately to something that is actually quite a poor interpretation. So, some more. At Gettysburg, 7,000 soldiers killed out of the casualties. Brazil's seeing those deaths in 2 to 3 days. Worldwide, less than a day. Just the British deaths, not the French or German. 19,000. July 1st, 1916. First day of the Somme. Would have nearly seen that in a day worldwide on some days back in January. And Brazil's seeing that right now over the course of a week. That's the first day of the Somme. One of the most infamous days in all of military history, the absolutely darkest day in British military history. And we're not that far off the high point internationally, with 10,000 deaths per day presently. Then in the UK specifically, during World War II, civilian deaths from Luftwaffe bombing, 70,000, with 40,000 during the period of the Blitz. The UK has seen 127,000 deaths this past year from COVID, including Sir Tom Moore, who survived that said war. not a civilian, but as a soldier. Then, of course, he came to fame, raising tens of millions of pounds for NHS-related charities. Now he's dead from last month from COVID. So with those numbers I gave, somebody can cheaply run with them and say I'm comparing deaths in the trenches, and I could go on for some time about how horrific those scenes were. It's, of course, these aren't the same things. The war, as I mentioned, and deaths from various illnesses, it's all different. It's that these are death figures that people focus well upon. They stand out. But for some reason, the deaths we're seeing now, over the last 12 months and change, are dwindling by the wayside and are mounting up day after day after day after day. And even though the vaccines are working wonders, and in some countries we're seeing an effect on case and death count, but I'll point out again, I'm ever more interested and thrown a bit back by this continued dwindling interest regarding how severe the problem is. Also, I'll say I did bring up the First World War, even though I well preface the function of my comparisons. One can fairly contest that perhaps I should only be looking at very comparable events. So, from the same time period, why not the Spanish flu? And yeah, that may be fair. The very direct fallout from COVID is much less than the Spanish flu. But even then, with the pandemic a century ago, think about how much more attention the war deaths from that time received, and still receive, than the flu deaths, with the latter being a much greater figure. Certainly the war deserves an extra amount of attention due to its overall ramifications, to put the suffering aside, but gauge the attention between the two and the books written on each topic and so on. How much difference is there? I'll let you use your imagination. So, again, why things are like this, I have no idea. If you do, please tell me what I'm missing, what's occurring. It feels really identical to me as to how people stop thinking so much about the threat from nuclear weapons, and it's deposited to the back of the mind. The COVID deaths now seem to be sitting in a similar sort of place. Even though, obviously, I'll state again, it's all different situations. Now, exactly a year ago from when I'm recording this, I wrote something, and I start off with the passage I found in The Plague by Albert Camus. In fact, like our fellow citizens, Ryu was caught off his guard, and we should understand his hesitations in light of this fact, and similarly understand how he was torn between conflicting fears and confidence. When a war breaks out, people say, "It's too stupid, it can't last long." But though a war may well be too stupid, that doesn't prevent its lasting. Stupidity has a knack of getting its way, as we should see if we were not always so much wrapped up in ourselves. I think that passage is more prescient at this moment than when I jotted it down a year ago. Before I finish this spiel, one more thought, going back to the example of the psalm that I had earlier. One of the most brutalized regiments that day was the 1st Newfoundlanders. 266 killed and many more wounded. In his book on that day, Elegy, Andrew Roberts writes, of the 801 men of the Newfoundland Regiment who went over the top, 266 were killed and 446 wounded. Hardly a family on the island was untouched by the massacre at Beaumont-Hamel. Some lost 2, 3, or even 4 members that day. taken into account per capita deaths, that brutal hit to the small then Dominion is less than that of what the Brazilian state of Amazonas is feeling right now. Last time, different deaths, different scenes, I know. It's to give you a sense of proportion. But a more interesting difference to look at can be seen with just Newfoundland itself here. At the beginning of the war, those in government in Newfoundland would have had absolutely no idea at all whatsoever that they would be putting troops into an utterly futile war of attrition and total bloodbath. It seemed like a pragmatic action to defend king and empire against a bout of Prussian aggression. This past year, the government of Newfoundland has been able to see a problem coming and present. At the start of the pandemic, and as the spread of the UK variant more recently has come on, they took staunch action both times to the benefit of the health and livelihood of their population. Unlike Newfoundland, the vast majority of comparable governments have done much less. Well, why? Well, that's all my rumbling and rambling for today that you have to put up with. So, enjoy the conversation I had here. Roberto is a very energetic guy, and I had a great chat with him. I hope you get a lot out of it, as I sure did. Cheers, guys. All right, Roberto, tell us a little bit about yourself first and what work you've been doing.
So I'm a physicist. I hold a PhD degree in physics, in theoretical physics, and over the last let's say 15 years, I've been working with mathematical modeling in ecology and epidemiology, which brings us to the point of COVID stories and so on. So I've been a modeler and a theoretical epidemiologist, if you wanted, over the last 10 or 15 years.
Okay. And then when did you get started on modeling with COVID? Just pretty much last February, March, right when it started?
Yeah, when it started. I mean, to be precise, exactly 1 year ago in March. In March, we here in Brazil, we began to see that the thing would be serious, and there are not so many modeling groups here. And in fact, there's no modeling group directly connected to the Ministry of Health, or what would be the health secretary in the US. And there were not so many. And so together with a bunch of people, my students, collaborators, and we started to discuss modeling, and then we started to discuss also with people from public health officials and people that do research in public health, epidemiologists, and even political scientists and so on, so that we can, so that we could find, say, contributions that modeling can give, which are meaningful for decision makers. So that's more or less how it started a year ago, and I've been into this since then, and this has been very absorbing, and since March last year.
So you're saying you're trying to connect with various people. Were you trying to reach out to the federal government? Or also the state government there or the city government as well in Sao Paulo?
So we reached out to initially with the city government of the city of São Paulo, started, there was a working group with people that are not necessarily public agents. They are also professors at the university in epidemiology and so on, together with people that work for the city. And this went on for more or less 2 months. But when the models started to tell them that, well, we have a problem, and if you relax the non-pharmaceutical interventions now, you will have an increase of cases and so on. They didn't like it, and
the city government didn't like to hear that.
Not at all. And didn't like it, and then they could cut ties with us. We also worked with the government of the state of São Paulo, which was looking for people doing modeling. There were 3 modeling groups working with the government of the state, and we were one of those groups. This went on until September, October, and then they just disappeared. I mean, there were no new meetings and so on, and that's it. And then some smaller cities also wanted to work with us and so on, and so we trained people and to do simple analysis and so on. Federal government, no. Federal government is, as you might imagine, very problematic these days in Brazil. So just to give you an idea, federal government has an agency of public health. I mean, they have a foundation. It's called a Foundation Oswaldo Cruz, which is usually called Fio Cruz, which is it's enormous thing and so on, and which is directly connected to the Minister of Health, but the Minister of Health doesn't pay attention to the Fio Cruz people. So which makes the situation very, very really strange. And so essentially the Ministry of Health, that there are no contacts because there is their views on the epidemic in general are let's say orthogonal. They are very different, but from what scientists and the medical doctors and so on think about. So federal government has downplayed the importance of the epidemic, has insisted very strongly on what they called early treatment, which is chloroquine and other stuff, which has not been abandoned until now. And they also were not very vocal about the vaccines. Now they are saying, no, we will do the vaccination and so on, but they didn't buy the vaccine. But at the good time, they didn't secure contracts, say in August or September, so they are now short of vaccines. So there's no contact whatsoever with the Ministry of Health at this point.
So why were they hesitant to acquire some contracts with the vaccines up until now? And we'll get into at some point, obviously, what the situation is like in Brazil right now. It keeps escalating pretty severely every day. I was just looking at what was occurring there yesterday, and it's rather severe. Actually, it's extreme. But so I'm going to piece that together and assume that the present situation was probably a partial factor why the Brazilian federal government has changed their tune a bit on vaccines, then I'm assuming.
Yes. Well, our president is a denier of the of COVID-19. And
go into that, like with Bolsonaro. Well,
yeah.
What were his specific dynamics with the pandemic from the very beginning? And because just to outline it a bit, for you and for everybody, And you're probably aware of a lot of this, like in North American media, um, like the coverage of Bolsonaro since his election was really simplistic. It was, he's Trump of the tropics or something like that. They just try to create these parallels with Trump, but they're different people, and there's a lot of more specific and severe issues with Bolsonaro that are quite different than the former American president. And the same sort of deal that occurred with say Trump and the British Prime Minister, where is there's not a lot of comparisons there. They have similar hair and bad dietary habits, but there's a lot of differences, and just this low resolution projection of what's actually occurring. So go over what Bolsonaro from the beginning until now has done with the pandemic as far as messaging and his actual policies.
So at the very beginning, Bolsonaro kind of denied the importance. There's a famous thing that it's just like a flu. Okay, will be good. Okay, never mind. Well, then when situation turned out to be much more complicated, that was just a mild flu. Then there was a clash between Bolsonaro and his health secretary, which was a guy that, to be in the government of Bolsonaro, it's already suspect. But anyhow, this guy was a former medical doctor, and he probably just thought, I have a problem here, and I have to do something, because otherwise this would be a disaster. So I have to do something. And this would imply lockdowns and so on. And Bolsonaro just fired him. And then he put a second minister, or secretary of health, if you want, and which was a medical doctor, which stayed for a month because he refused to promote chloroquine, and Bolsonaro fired him also. And then until some days ago, from May or May, June, until some days ago, there was a general from the army who was running the Ministry of Health. And
he brought in somebody from the military to the health department.
To the health department, yes. And this guy brought in like 15 or 20 other military for, you have the subsecretary for this and that, for many things. And these positions that the minister can indicate, where he put a lot of military in. And now they changed it, but it's just 3 or 4 days ago for a new minister. But the guy is also saying, we will continue the good policies that have been followed until now. So I don't know. He doesn't come from the military, but I don't know if this will make a lot of difference. But anyhow, the policies in general, after this first turbulent beginning with firing the Secretary of Health and so on, had been essentially, we are against any kind of anything resembling a lockdown. Even it's not a lockdown, it's just restrictions. We never had a lockdown. Lockdown say you cannot go out. You could always go out. Well, commerce has restrictions and this and that. But in general, we didn't have a lockdown, but there were restrictions in many places, in the majority of the Brazilian states. And so Bolsonaro was against it. Okay, but the governors could decide. So the governor decides, and sometimes the mayor decides. And so this one was one point, and the second, then they promoted chloroquine. All until today, they promote chloroquine, and this chloroquine and other drugs that I can't remember the name of. So this was very bad. And then you had something which is kind of every day in the news, and Bolsonaro saying, "Oh, everybody dies a day." He said things like that. Everybody, no, you have to be. I mean, you have to have. You have to be strong. You have to go for fighting for your life. Why will you stay at home? Go and be a hero. And like things like that, which are really, really. That's typically banana republic things, and well, then there came the vaccines. But U.S. and most European countries, and even obviously China and other countries, they secured contracts with big pharma, and contracts that would be like if you have a vaccine and if you can show that it works and if it's approved and licensed, we will buy a certain sum. We give you the guarantees that we will buy. So Brazil didn't do this. So what Brazil did is have a contract with AstraZeneca, and this government of the state of São Paulo had an agreement with Sinopharm from China to produce a vaccine that's called CoronaVac, and they will be locally produced in the second semester. For the time being, that they are just buying, but in principle, this will be produced locally at some point. So these were the only two contracts. But okay, the contracts themselves are not bad, but it's not enough. It's just not enough. It will take until the middle of the next year if it's just these contracts. Okay, and we have the epidemic raging now. Okay, so they're just not enough vaccines, and this is curious because Brazil has a very strong tradition with vaccination. And actually, there's a network of vaccination centers which has, say, a point of vaccinations in every single Brazilian town. Even the smallest town, there is a place where there's a person or a group of persons that had some training and knows how to vaccinate people. So, and this is, let's say, a very, very big capillarity. So and this thing is ready. So there are people saying, "I'm ready to vaccinate," but there's no vaccine. And so that's what happened in respect to vaccines. And now, well, as there's also now a political twist in the Brazilian politics with the resurgence of the previous president, Lula da Silva, which was he was forbidden to run for president because of corruption charges, but the corruption charges were dropped, and now he can run again. And next year we have elections, and he just appeared once the charges were dropped, and he made a speech like a president, like let's say common things that are more or less obvious. And next day, Bolsonaro started to say that we will vaccinate everybody. No. And now he wants to be the king of vaccination. So, and that's why Bolsonaro changed the health secretary, because this military would never get it, and he was very weak, and he would not be okay with this. And so he's trying to find somebody who will not what he wants now from the new health secretary is vaccination, and maybe let's forget about chloroquine, but don't say the chloroquine is not okay. Just don't talk too much about this. So maybe people will forget about this. But no lockdowns. That's the main stance. That's the every day Bolsonaro is against the lockdowns, and this is now a pretty big problem. Why? Because we are in the middle of an upsurge of cases never seen, with a speed of increase enormous, and there are no. I mean, if even say we by miracle have the vaccines, that wouldn't do the job neither now for the present problem. Because I mean, it takes time to vaccinate people, and it takes time to have the results, and so on. And so action has to be taken now. When I say now, it's today or tomorrow. And the only thing that governors and the mayors can do is lockdowns. Is say to people that they cannot circulate in the city, that they have to stay at home, and only the very essential things have to be open, remain open, like I mean, to buy food and to go to pharmacies or something like that. And so that's the main point now. And Bolsonaro is against it. He says that people will starve to death instead of dying suffocated, because there are already cases of people dying suffocated because they didn't get an ICU bed. Okay? That is happening. Not in all cities, I will not say widespread, but in many places. And today was the first time that somebody in the city of São Paulo, which is the largest city and the most populous city and also richest city, today is the day the first person died in São Paulo because the person could not get an ICU bed. And so it's really becoming very, very problematic and dramatic. And well, at the federal level, the story goes no lockdowns because people want to be able to work and will starve to death. That's their official stance on it.
Just to come back to the present situation while we brought that up, I was looking, and it seems like right now the deaths are disproportionately high compared to the last big surge that you had in July and August. And so cases and deaths were really high at that point. But at this point in time, deaths are even, cases are higher during this surge than you had during July and August. The deaths are as well, but deaths are much higher. What is the result of that? Is there less testing, so the case count isn't as high? Or is this the result of the P1 variant? Or is it just like that so many of the patients in the ICUs are only getting, mild amounts of care, and so many of them are unnecessarily dying? So what's going on that's causing this monumental death surge? And what have your we actually haven't got much into your actual modeling yet, but so what is your modeling at the present show for what things can be like over the next coming weeks or months?
So the first thing is, let's say, mortality. Mortality is something a little bit complex. Why? So you have what we could say the natural pathogenicity of the virus. It can be more aggressive or not. Okay, so there's something which is can be connected to the variant, that you're more likely to die from a variant or not. And so this is one point. But then there is another point, which has nothing to do with the variant, which is that when you have so many cases, then your hospital structure, your hospitals will just fail. I mean, they will collapse. There will be no way of treating everybody, and therefore there are people that will die because the treatment is not adequate, it's not the best he could normally get, or just couldn't get any treatment, or the admissions at hospital are very restricted to the very severe cases. So the not so severe cases might sometimes there's misjudgment about the severity of the case, and people die at home. And so mortality comes from several aspects, not only the virus, say virulence of the virus, and but also from say where the epidemic is going on. If you look for the Amazonian city of Manaus, where we had a disaster last January, well, that's a very poor place, and hospitals and so on, they're not prepared. And then you put this together with bad management. For instance, there were no oxygen tubes, you know. So because I mean nobody thought about that or something incredibly. So mismanagement, and then you get a very high mortality. Maybe if you go with the same variant of the virus to a smaller city, which has money, is prosperous, and has a good hospital, maybe the mortality would be lower. And so there's a confluence of things that creates mortality. Now, what's happening now? Today we are seeing, since the middle of February, we are seeing an increase of number of cases, not only in the region, the Amazonian region, where we had this enormous increase of cases in January, but almost everywhere. Almost all the states of the Brazilian Federation, you have a very strong increase. It's already more or less 1 month of increasing cases and associated deaths. The death comes usually a little bit later. You have the first increase of the number of cases and then the increase of number of deaths. And then you have this enormous increase. So what's the reason you have this? So there's, first of all, there is this new variant called P1, or a Brazilian variant, a Manaus variant, or P1 for more technical people. And so there are now 3 research groups, and then one is the group which I work with, and 2 other groups, one from Amazonas and another group from the University of São Paulo and from Imperial College, that have investigated what happened in Manaus in January. How could it be that in a place where you already had a very strong epidemic in the past, so there should be more immune people, yes, how could you have such a surge of cases there? And what the 3 studies converge to the fact that this P1 variant is at least twice as transmissible as the original variants of the previous, say, resident variants. So 2.5, 2.2, depends a little bit. The groups don't find exactly the same number, but it's above 2. And so this means that when you have a more transmissible variant, this is like the UK variant. Okay? A very good example is what happened in the UK, but also if you want to look for what happened in Portugal, Portugal had a very good epidemic management in the first wave, and they went through pretty okay. So when you have this thing arriving, the UK variant arriving in Portugal, you have an enormous number of cases. They almost collapsed. They had to call for help from other European countries. So now you have a thing here in Brazil, the variant P1, which is even more transmissible than the UK variant. And so this creates, even if it's not more virulent, I mean, it could be that it doesn't kill more than the others. But anyhow, it will increase so fast that it can take the hospital system or the healthcare system in general to collapse. And it's just like if the epidemic now is the speed of the epidemic is higher, so the pace of the epidemic is just accelerating. That's what this means to be more transmissible. Okay, so everything goes very fast, and in order to prevent this, when you have a fast enemy, you better be fast also, and so action should have been taken to try to avoid the spread of P1, but nothing has been done. Essentially nothing. There continues to be flights from Manaus, like 7 or 8 flights per day for São Paulo. So it's at least 700 persons per day coming from Manaus. Obviously, there will be somebody someday infected and without knowing, because there are symptomatic cases, and this will spread. And this is what you would expect, and actually it's spread pretty much everywhere in Brazil now. So the P1 is now dominant. And the important thing for practical measures is to know that it's more transmissible. That's the main point. Okay, I think looking for the reasons for the emergence of P1, which is a scientific important problem, this should be done and in due time, and also pointing to the responsibilities of people that in the government, city government, state government, federal government, which actually created a kind of breeding ground for the emergence of such a beast like the P1. And but what now at the day we are talking, well, all of this is it's not secondary, but the point is action has to be taken immediately. And because of this very, very accelerated pace of the epidemic, which is happening right now.
So outline here, what are things as far as the increase in cases and the increase in deaths? What are the figures looking like right now in throughout all of Brazil, or particular states where it's the worst off right now? And what do you see happening going forward?
So let's see, the numbers I have in my mind about Brazil is over the last months, every day the number of deaths increases. And well, if you look to the running mean, because of notification problems, but anyhow, every day they increase, and they are more or less almost a month now, over 2,000 deaths per day. And yesterday it was 2,800 per day. And I would not be surprised that we come to 3,000 or 4,000 in some days. And so it's a very high number. We never had anything like that before, not even close to that. And the number of cases per day is usually already above 80,000 per day, and they probably can reach 100,000 per day. Even if you say, even if there were something very, very strange happening, everybody stays at home for 2 weeks, and so let's cut the transmission of the virus. Well, there's some, kind of inertia that the number of cases will continue to increase, and I would not be surprised to see increases above 100,000 per day. And this is not even near anything we have seen in the first wave. So, and this has been going on, except Manaus. Manaus is from January and so on. This has been going on for the last months, and has really increased very very strongly the numbers. I can't remember how much it was in the middle of February, but it was half of this, and people were at a certain point already a little bit alarmed, but it's more than 1,200 deaths per day in Brazil. It's getting dramatic. Well, we are at 2,800 now, and it's growing.
You mentioned before in the situation that happened in Manaus in January, and that was getting a lot of attention worldwide. And the one factor that was really getting pointed out was that there wasn't, as you mentioned, it is a poorer part of the country, and there wasn't a lot of testing early on, and so a lot of the infection numbers early on are based on guesses, from what I understand. And so they estimated it was something around 75% of the population early on, if that's correct, were already infected at some point. And then yet throughout that region, there was this new mass wave of infections. So what do you think was going on there? Was there something with this new variant that's able to circumvent natural immunity at all? Or is it just that the immunity over time is waning?
So all of this, but how much of each of these ingredients? This is the difficult part. So what people call the prevalence, how many people have immunity in a given population in Manaus, was probably high. There's this number of 75% in, I think, September or October. I can't now really remember exactly the date. But people, this is from the group from University of São Paulo and Imperial College. And people from the group of Manaus didn't agree. They came to numbers later, like 40, 50%, well, still high. Okay, and what happened is also that the number of cases more or less stabilized in what one could call a plateau, like a high number but stable from August to November, and people also, I mean, the non-pharmaceutical intervention and the policies of the local government were, let's say, loosening and not taking so much into account, or just the mayor said, okay, let it be, and so on, and that, everything were more or less loose. And well, then you have in November, mid-November, you start to see the number of cases climbing. So obviously, then you say, okay, well, but if you have 75%, would this be expected? Well, maybe even if you had herd immunity, the herd immunity doesn't mean that you don't have any cases. You have an overshoot, and the overshoot goes to almost 90% with an R0 equal to 3. So there are people still enough people to get sick. And so this started to increase. And then obviously when you're arriving in December with the increasing numbers, the mayor wanted to shut down the city, and there were protests mainly from people that run commerces and so on. And no, it's Christmas time, and okay, the mayor just said, okay, let it be, and no restrictions, and then obviously increased. And this happened also in many other places in Brazil. I would not say all states, but many of them, because of the Christmas, New Year's, and so on. But then in most of the states that started to decrease after Christmas, like middle of January. And this did not happen in Manaus. Manaus then exploded. And really, it's very strong increase of cases. And then research groups found that the new variant, P1, was discovered like more or less January 10 or 11. And with mutations of concern and so on. So what I think that happened is, well, there's the unfortunate combination of the new variant with the end of the year season and parties and so on. It was very unfortunate. I mean, the relaxation of restrictions with the appearance of new variant. Now, what is to come to the second point now? Why is this variant dangerous? Okay, I say, okay, that's more, what I told you is more or less descriptive. Okay, just that's what happened. And then they had to lock down somehow. You have to lock down. If people from the commerce and people don't like it, but you have to close it because this was seen in all the world. People were despair to get oxygen tubes, no places to go, and so on. I mean, that kind of horror.
Wasn't there even oxygen coming in from Venezuela even?
Yeah, even from Venezuela. From Venezuela, and well, I mean, that was really something you would not have imagined that this would happen. But now, if you want to ask, okay, then a month later, in the mid-February, you see this happening in the other states. You see the increase. The consequences are maybe not exactly the same as Manaus, because Manaus is poor, it's in the middle of the Amazon forest, it's difficult to get access to it and so on. But you are seeing the increase, and you are seeing collapse also in other places. Then you could now ask a more scientific question, which is, so what are the what is it with P1 variant that makes that causes all this troubles? So one thing, it's more transmissible, and this is already bad enough. Let's say bad enough in the sense that this increases the speed of the pandemic. The second point is, could it be able to evade natural immunity due to the people that had the other variants? Okay. Well, there are results from our group and from the group from USP and University of São Paulo and Imperial College, which do not exactly agree, but in the numbers, but more or less concur to the same vision, which is there's a certain amount of immune escape. And in our simulations, this is like 28% of the new cases since the appearance in the beginning of November of P1. 28% are reinfections of P1 in people that were immune to the previous strain. So 28 people from the other group found it in the 40-50s. So because, well, there are many assumptions when you do the modeling and so on. There are different assumptions and things that you have to decide how to model without having, say, empirical evidence. So you have to take some, say, what's the best guess I can have for certain things. And so this is something that I mean, the jury is still out about this. Okay, then we don't know, but there is the possibility of a certain level of immune escape. We have to take care when we say, okay, immune escape. And it doesn't mean that you have 100% immune escape. I mean, just the 10% is already bad enough, okay? Because when you say it's 10%, but if you have already 50% of your population supposed to be immune, and then you say 10% of reinfection, it's 10% of all these guys. So it's a lot of people, and it's already something very, very important. And there's another thing, and there's the waning immunity. Well, waning immunity is difficult to assess. So very good. There are no data at all about what waning immunity due to P1 or due to other variants, the resident variants, with data, and any data from Brazil. There's the only data that exists is a big cohort study in England called Siren. And but I'm still not convinced exactly that they are seeing the waning immunity. And again, waning immunity has to have a scale. Maybe you have waning immunity, but you lose immunity in 2 or 3 years, that would not even be relevant for anything which is happening now. So so you have to see the degree of this. And this is really the frontiers of knowledge now. We don't know exactly about the waning immunity, and we are not able to access really reinfections. And this is the story about reinfection is also complicated, because what we do in our group and the other group that I mentioned from Imperial College and the University of São Paulo, what we do and they do is what we call an epidemiological study. And in epidemiology, they call it an ecological study, meaning that that's at the population level. You have models that model the dynamics of the disease with all the susceptible, infected, and so on. A big model, but anyhow, same principles. And then you look at that, and you fit the model, and then, well, you do fitting with with criteria and so on, and there's a lot of technical thing. And so, but it's done at the population level. And you would say, okay, but couldn't you go there and just look and see if there are reinfections? The real thing, you go there and see. But this is very difficult, because you need usually what you would expect is at least that you have the first the official way of looking at this. I think is too restrictive. This is, you have a case, and you have a PCR test of the first infection, and then you have the samples, and you go and sequence the genome of the virus. And when the person gets infected again, you do it again, the PCR and the genome, to see exactly the thing. So the number of cases you find in this way is very, very small. In Amazonas, we have one case that's been found. But this doesn't mean that there's no reinfection, because you could also have reinfections of people that had mild cases. They didn't even go for a PCR test because they were not hospitalized. They just went to the doctor. The doctor say, okay, you have it, but clinically diagnosis, and go home, and well, most people get better. And so the person actually had COVID, but this is not on the records. It's not on the records, at least at the level of details like PCR tests. So these people will not be considered when they have a second, when they get reinfected. This will not go to the official data. So it's difficult to track this. So you would have, you need a special clinical trials and field experiments, and with a different definition of reinfection, in order to assess if reinfection is actually happening. Not only seeing this from mathematical models which look at the population and say the best explanation for what we see is transmissibility and reinfection, but actually looking at that and seeing the reinfection. This has not been done, and this is difficult. It's not difficult only in Brazil, but in particular for Manaus, it's very difficult, because no resources, difficult, no scientific infrastructure, everything is difficult there. But this is difficult in general. And we ought to expect that there should be efforts to assess this problem, which brings us to a last problem, if you allow me, which is immune escape is not the same as escape from vaccine. So because, well, natural immunity is not exactly the same as immunity due to vaccination. Yeah. So at this point, we come to the only results that are known through press releases. And people from AstraZeneca and from Sinopharm, but the Brazilian correspondent, which is the producer of this coronavac here, which is called Butantan. And they're saying that the vaccines are efficient against P1, which is a good news, because we are vaccinated with AstraZeneca and coronavac. But I mean, there are no data how efficient. And again, you put numbers on that. Okay, is it really efficient, or is it more or less efficient, or just a little bit efficient? So you don't know. And what you have,
it's really that unknown still now how efficient all the vaccines are against P1. Like there's just some efficiency that it's that ambiguous still.
Yeah, this is ambiguous because how do we measure that? Because now you have a vaccine, and you are in the middle of a vaccination campaign. You cannot get to a group and say you are now the control group. That's not ethical. And say you will stay 3 months this year during our experiment, our essay on how on efficiency, but you won't get a vaccine. But even if it's your right to get a vaccine, and this is obviously non-ethical, and this cannot be done, because you are denying the right of the people to get vaccinated. So what people do is in vitro assays. So I'm not a microbiologist to really talk about this, but they look at plasma from people that had been infected and vaccinated, and see if the plasma is annihilates essentially the virus when the virus is introduced into a plasma of people. That all of this goes on in the lab, and that's what people have done also in the most for the UK variant and so on. And that's the usual thing. That's the standard in the world to look for this is this kind of in vitro thing, because again, you cannot have cohorts or something with people denying people the right to be vaccinated. So it's an open question.
Yeah, for sure. So what is the level of vaccination going on in Brazil right now? Like what percentage of the population actually has vaccines? Is it really?
I'd say like about 5%, but not the same everywhere in Brazil. Maybe some places have more vaccines and other places less. But I mean, the bottleneck is the number of available vaccines. It's a little bit different from other places where you have difficulties. In you have vaccines, but you don't have a good logistics for distribution and getting the vaccines to the vaccination centers and actually getting people there and so on. No, this is a plus in Brazil. We have the infrastructure to vaccinate people, so that's a good news in Brazil. And but we didn't buy enough vaccines, so now the government's trying to buy the vaccines they can, and then obviously if you go to Pfizer and they say, okay, we can sell you some, but if you want more, you have to wait more than a year because you didn't buy at a good moment. And so vaccination is going on, but let's say, for instance, at this point, just to give an example, I would say here where I live in the state of São Paulo, now we are vaccinating. Next week starts the vaccination of people that are older than 73 years. So people younger than 73 years, they still have to wait, and maybe until the June or July, if everything goes more or less as has been planned, which is a big question mark, but anyhow, maybe people up to the age of 60 will be vaccinated. Until the middle of the year, and the second semester would be for the rest, and in part also 2022. So that's it. That has, however, a lot of if the vaccines come in due time, if more vaccines are bought. So now where people are talking about buying Sputnik or Covaxin from India, anything goes. And so because you have to accelerate this, and you don't have the vaccine. So that's depends on the delivery of the vaccines, and this schedule of delivery of vaccines, and not only in Brazil, but you can see in Europe, for instance, there has been a drama about this. This schedule can really be late, and maybe not at all taken very seriously. So this is one point, and then you have obviously to hope that the vaccines are, because well, then you have another problem, that the vaccines that from CoronaVac and from AstraZeneca are not so efficient. CoronaVac is like 50%, and AstraZeneca is between 60 and 70. So then I have this also. And but more importantly is, will they be effective against the variant? So we hope, and we hope that this press released scientific information turns out to be true. And if would be really good news. But if it turns out not to be so like this, then I don't know. And then you are in terra incognita, really. And we also obviously hope, as Brazil has bought a lot of AstraZeneca vaccines, that the current problems that are being discussed about problems with AstraZeneca to be minor, at least. And then AstraZeneca vaccination can go on. We hope for that. Again, if this is not true, then we are left without vaccines.
And at this moment, like if your it seems like your vaccinations have only really just begun, and there isn't that many distributed yet, where the amount of transmission that's going on, it seems like the vaccines now are not really going to have, they're not really going to do much of anything against this current wave now, are they? It's just
I mean, that's against the current situation. You cannot count on vaccines. The current situation is happening right now. You have to have actions that you can take right now. You could have taken actions as precautions months ago, let's say. They have not been taken. Okay, responsibilities then. At a given point, history will look at people and saying you did a bad job and so on. But well, at this point, you have to take action now. And vaccination, well, first, you don't have the vaccines, and even if you had the vaccines, it takes time to vaccinate people, and it takes time for the vaccine to have the effects of protecting people. And still, the vaccines are not 100% effective. So vaccination is a long-term strategy, or midterm, best case midterm strategy, or long-term strategy to have immune population, and therefore, let's say, eliminating or driving to very low levels the the number of infections. But for emergency situations, vaccination is not a strategy at all, because we are vaccinating people that are over 75. But the virus is now infecting everybody. I mean, people that are teenagers, and therefore vaccination is not a strategy for this upsurge. Now it's time for lockdowns and very strict rules of when and for what reason you can go out. But this faces political obstacles that are not minor. And this is very dependent on the city and on the state. So it is not a popular thing, because everybody wants to go out, and people want to continue to work, and it's natural. But as there are there's also I think that the federal government didn't have any advertisement campaign, or the stay at home, or this is pretty serious, and so on. No, nothing. And the president goes out and every day in the news or mainly on the social media saying, yeah, it's not that bad, yeah. And this also creates this impression that maybe it's not so bad, and creates also a divide between people, which is also the political divide. Brazil is now a very polarized society. And the political divide between the supporters of Bolsonaro and the people that don't support for any other, spectrum of political thought. I mean, from the left to the center right, there's a divide between all these people and Bolsonaro people, and the supporters of Bolsonaro, they don't help with these campaigns, and they are against closing anything. This happens in every city in Brazil. So there is a problem that what you have now to act in order not to collapse. And some cities already collapsed, but other cities are not collapsed, and they could try to avoid the collapse, but they have to act now. And they are not acting. They are waiting for the collapse, and then they act. It's like you look out and you see the rain coming, and then you say, I won't close my windows, because maybe it just goes the other way. And then when the rain comes and you are already facing problems at home, then you close the window. So
or try to.
Yeah, it's like it's reactive. And when the mayor said, well, I can't do anything. We don't have ICU beds. We don't have even normal beds. What should I do? I will close the city. Okay, they could have closed the city, let's say 2 weeks earlier, and maybe he could have even a mild lockdown in order not to come to the collapse. But what you see in many cities is let the collapse happen, and then when it collapse, it's like in Manaus. Manaus collapsed, and then there was no other thing to do than close everything. Nobody can go out. And so there is also this political problem, the political divide in Brazil, because Bolsonaro is the kind of people that creates divisions, and a lot of people that do not believe in the seriousness of the epidemic, and then the people from commerce, they don't want to lose money, and so on, and then the mayors and the governors are under pressure, and then some of them act more appropriately and consciously, and others not.
If any of the governors were to go ahead and implement some sort of swift lockdown or anything of the sort, would there be some sort of pushback from Brasilia?
Not really.
No, they
I
they,
mean,
they would they would be able to.
verbal pushback. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not really. Well, you have now. You have the state of São Paulo is implementing some sort of restrictions. I would not call it lockdown because, well, I live here. I look around a lot of people on the street.
Yeah.
It's not a lockdown.
It's
But I mean,
a
there's
lockdown.
Yeah. It's like, for instance, from 8 o'clock in the evening until 5 o'clock in the morning, there is officially a lockdown. You should not be on the streets. Which is followed by most of the people. Most of people abide to the law. So if it says you cannot go out after 8, they don't go. And yeah, but this is, I mean, it's already the time. A lockdown at midnight isn't so effective because there are not so many people at the streets anyhow at midnight. And so you have something like that, and then the commerce is kind of closed. You cannot go into a shop and buy something. You have to ask it for delivery service, or go with your car, and you should not go out of your car, and so on. But anyhow, still the people that work at this shop have to go get there to work. Therefore, they will circulate on the public transport or on cars and so on. And still, this is not a lockdown, even if there are this kind of restrictions. And so the president is against this. And he says that the government of Sao Paulo will starve the population to death, which is obviously not true. Okay? I'm starting with that. But so there's a very strong political tension between the governor of Sao Paulo and the governor and the president. And other governors also, going more or less in the same lines, have the same kind of political clash with Bolsonaro, but it's more words than anything else. It's because the federal government already they don't do anything. The health secretary is good for nothing, actually. The only thing is, okay, they are trying to get the vaccines, but for this immediate situation, they're doing nothing. And and I think it's unbelievable that the president just gave up the fight against COVID. I think this is something that really history will mark this fact that the president just gave up. And so essentially, so the federal government doesn't take action, but the president and the Secretary for Health and so on will start talking, the governor this and governor that and so on, but they don't take so many actions. And also São Paulo is the richest state, for instance, and then taking action against São Paulo may be not the best idea.
Oh, I see. Has there been any anybody in opposition or any of the mayors or anything that have at any point or are starting to try to promote any sort of lockdown, like actual lockdown or anything of that sort, or not really?
Actual lockdown?
Yeah. Actual lockdown. Yeah.
No, but now people are talking about real lockdowns in the southernmost state of Brazil. It's called Rio Grande do Sul, because the situation there is getting worse and worse, and they have to do something. What we had is mayors. So we have a city in the province of the state, smallest city in the state of São Paulo, and more or less provincial city, like 100,000 or 200,000 people live there, and they had an very strong upsurge months ago, more or less, and they just closed the city. There are real lockdowns. Okay? Even things that no delivery, in restricted times to go to the supermarket or to the pharmacy is all open because you need the pharmacies, but even buying in going to supermarkets and so on, that you have to pay attention for the hours of each supermarket, and it was very restricted, very restricted, and you were not allowed to go out. This city now, I mean, the number that obviously are falling, and then it's
when did this
lockdown works. The problem is getting how to get out of the lockdown without creating a new wave of infections. Now but the lockdown works because people stay at home. There's no contacts, no transmission, no disease, and so there are things like that in smaller cities which are lockdown, so that you could call it a lockdown. And here and there, because the situation gets too dramatic and the mayor decides. But no state government, we have 27 states, no state governor has decided for lockdown. It has restrictions, and some of them are stronger than the others, but it's on the restrictions. And then there are the governments that say they won't take any action. That's also incredible. There are governors that say, no, we won't do anything. And let the mayors decide. But, mayor of a smaller city, say, even it's not very small, 100,000, 200,000 inhabitants, and so on. These people don't have even the technical knowledge. They have probably a health secretary. This is probably a doctor of the city. And it's not necessarily somebody who knows about public health. Maybe it's just a cardiologist or, I don't know, orthopedist that's politically involved there and so on, and it gets to the health department. So they don't have necessarily the technical knowledge in these smaller cities of what is the best thing to do. So there should be guidelines coming from a larger body, and at least the state government.
Yeah. You mentioned before that commerce is really trying to push back against any sort of lockdowns and anything like that. What has the economic situation been like in Brazil over the last 12 months? Because it seemed like countries like New Zealand that have had hard lockdowns and got it under control, they've had a pretty swift economic bounce back. And then I've noticed in, like, say, Sweden, that have had a pretty cavalier approach to it, the whole situation. They haven't done their country any large economic favors, like their neighboring Norway, who has they haven't had any like actual, like what you and I would define as a lockdown, but they've had some pretty strict measures at points and have taken it way more seriously than the Swedes have, and their economic damage was much less than Sweden. You just can't have a functioning market with outbreaks all the time. So like, what has the economic situation actually looked like in Brazil the last year?
Well, to give you a number, the Brazilian GDP decreased by something between 4 and 5% last year. Well, the economic situation is bad, and it's not improving. At the very beginning, we had a very strong devaluation of the Brazilian currency, the real. It used to be like $1 is equal to more or less 4 reais. And now it's 5.5, or even sometimes it goes up to 6. So it's a very strong devaluation. And this also increases the chance. I mean, this is not only bad for people that want to travel abroad, and now their money isn't worth so much as it was before, but it's also bad for the economy is interconnected, and things that you buy get a little bit and more expensive and so on. So well, this was this happened in the middle of the last year. But the situation did not actually improve. And what we had in the middle of last year until the end of last year was there was some money for people, poor people. uh, during the pandemic. So they got like $100 per month. And well, Brazilian current, if you say this in the United States, $100 is nothing. Well, it's not much money here neither. But anyhow, it's for very poor people, it's something. And uh, and this now and this stopped at the end of December, and now they are restarting. But it's not. It's like $30 per month, so it's almost nothing, and it's not even enough to buy the food. And yeah, so this was something that is not even due to Bolsonaro. It's due to the Brazilian lower chamber and to the Congress in general. And now again, there has been resistance from the executive branch of the administration, but well, Congress anyhow passed a bill. So this is a little bit like helping people to cope with the situation. But otherwise, the situation is not improving, and we don't know. We really don't know. I'm not an economist to know details of maybe some sectors are better than others. I think probably commerce is very bad. Maybe, I don't know, digital economy, maybe they have better time now. But so I don't know about that.
Yeah, that seemed to be common. A lot of places they want to go against the lockdowns for the sake of the economy, while the economy's tanking.
Sure.
Yeah, has that been because generally a lot of people vote with their wallet and how their wallet's looking. Has that been hurting Bolsonaro in the polls at all, or in his popularity, or has he been having a bit of a propaganda push to try to boost his image still, or how's that all been working for him?
In the last year, 2020, the image of Bolsonaro and the approval rate raised incredibly
throughout the whole year,
during the second half of the year, and
wow.
mainly due to this $100 that people got, and now it's decreasing. Approval rate is at its lowest since he took office. So this year there was a very strong reversal, and mainly also from February on, with the situation getting worse and worse, and having this health secretary, this military guy, saying stupid things, and people started to look at that and say, "Well, this guy is saying bullshit, actually," so Bolsonaro gets really, I think, a little bit more afraid, not because he really cares about people, but he cares about his popularity, and for re-election elections in October 2022, and so he cares about that, and that's why now you have this twist, and Bolsonaro say, no, we will buy a lot of vaccines. So all the story now is he's trying to get back his popularity by vaccinating people. Okay, we hope he can vaccinate people, even if he is responsible for not having bought the vaccines in time. But well, anyhow, now he's trying to buy the vaccines. And this is also, I think, a move due to the popularity decrease of Bolsonaro.
And so, do you think he's going to try to do anything in the future now, like try to encourage some other sort of subsidy program, or take some other sort of action to what do you think his plans going forward are to try to bring back his popularity?
So he's pretty much chaotic guy. So So he was trying to go. I think his only thing is being Mr. Vaccination. Okay, although this is really he has no merits about it, but he will try to do put the machine of the federal government and advertisements and so on about the vaccination. I think this is maybe the move he is planning. He will maybe give up the stories about chloroquine and so on without saying anything. He'll just forget about it. Okay, like okay, every medical doctor has the right to give the drugs he thinks to prescribe the drugs he thinks are the best. So also I would say okay, just try to forget that what I said in the past. But he will continue to be against the lockdowns and the restrictions, not only lockdowns or restrictions. I think he will be against it. So I don't know. Maybe he will try to have other moves that have nothing to do with the pandemic, and on the economic part, or don't know. It's not very clear. And well, then there are the authoritarian temptation. It's always, Brazilian democracy.
Yeah, on that point,
young.
like I'm not,
it's not
I'm
like
not,
US.
yeah. I'm going to try to not age you too much here, Roberto, but like some people might not know, like your democracy is only 36 years old, and so apologies, I'm not going to try to point out how your age here, but you obviously have a very lucid memory of the past regime that ended in 1985. Do you see any parallels between your current president and the past regime?
So,
and as well, he was in the, if I'm correct, he was in the military too at that point.
He was as a captain.
Yeah.
In the military, and he quit because they forced him to quit actually at the time back in the 80s because he wanted to promote some kind of insurrection. I don't know the details, but anyhow, yeah. So there's an authoritarian temptation. He has put a lot of military in many important positions in the government, but it's not obvious that the military want to take a next step into, say, in a military coup. That doesn't look so much like that. I think so. But that's uncertain at this point. The point is also, because what Bolsonaro is saying at this, it reminds me a little bit of the end of the Trump era in US, that let's see if we will have fair elections. He started already to talk about this a year and a half before the elections, and obviously trying to say, I won't accept to be defeated. So this will be a very stressful time for the Brazilian institutions. At the present time, there's one thing that very, these are details of Brazilian life. Bolsonaro was from the military, but a low grade official, not a general. And well, the military were also a little bit, there were divides in the military and so on. And he was kind of the people that were not at power in the end of the military dictatorship in Brazil, because he was the kind of a little bit wild guy, and he was not well seen by the generals that ruled the country back until 85. So I don't know if he himself would have the prestige enough with militaries to stage a coup. I don't think this will happen. I think that although he will I mean, give the declarations and speeches and so on. A whole, yeah. I don't. I think the institutions will survive and democracy will survive because it's not only that that a part of the elite is also Brazilian elite and the people that have money and so on. Is also fed up with Bolsonaro. It's this kind of crazy guy which is chaotic and the policies, for instance, with respect to the epidemic. You know that if even if you are a banker or I mean, and you would say, okay, I don't mind so much if the Bolsonaro is a little bit crazy, but I'm doing good business. But now, well, everything is under threat because of the mismanagement of the epidemic, and he maybe he will lose some support from a certain part of Brazilian elite also, and this can make the times more difficult for Bolsonaro in the future.
Mm. And is there, from his opponents for your election next year, is there any talk from them concerning the pandemic, like what they might have done differently or what should be done differently?
From the opposition, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, opposition in Brazil was let's say, find a word, manifold. There are many tendencies, and they couldn't. Brazilian opposition is not united in a front, and the reaction has been weak. What we have seen is people that are in power at the governments of the states, which are oppositions, although they are right-wing opposition. For instance, the governor of São Paulo, he is opposition, but he's right-wing. So he is a politician on the right, would be, but he is not a extreme right, or at least it's not crazy, and pro-business and so on, a little bit authoritarian something, but I mean, enemy of Bolsonaro, and well, he's tried to, let's say, surf the wave of discontent with Bolsonaro and so on, and positioning himself as an alternative. That's what he is trying to do, and one of the things is trying to have the state of São Paulo as an example of good management of the epidemic. But well, it's not so good. It's also not so good. I mean, we are seeing the increase of cases here. Decisions have been delayed, maybe next week, and then you have this kind of soft lockdown or restrictions that are not a lockdown and so on, and it's also not so good. So there isn't anybody really at the opposition, I mean, which has a serious voice at the opposition that could promote an option of policies. Now all the lights are on Lula da Silva, Lula, because he reappeared into the scene, and he's trying to make a very broad coalition. And he's talking about vaccination and about the necessity of the need of lockdowns and so on, and he's kind of be like very broad coalition, means from the left to the right, but opposition to Bolsonaro. So maybe something comes out from this as an alternative. I don't think he will build a plan now, because I mean, he's not in power anymore, and but people will start talking about options. I think so.
Yeah, and then maybe that could push some of the governors or the lower house of government to actually make some changes, perhaps. Yeah. Do you think if you had a different executive branch during this whole crisis, a different president and a different cabinet, do you think that the situation would have been drastically different, or is there other political issues within Brazil that make the country so susceptible to have allowed this catastrophe to flourish to such the severe degree that it's at.
Absolutely, I think it would be very different, and I think that that Bolsonaro is a culprit of what is happening, because I mean, if you look at all the political spectrum here in Brazil, anybody would do it better, and even people that I don't support, I mean, they would do it better than Bolsonaro. And if you look also Latin America, is not so different from us, and the rest of Latin America. So they also have problems and so on. But you look at Uruguay. Uruguay is an example for the world. And okay, it's a small. It's like New Zealand. It's small and they can close easily and so on and so on. But you see, even Argentina is doing better. And they at the beginning they had a right-wing politician and a left-wing politician, but it's going on. Chile is vaccinating at the highest speed of vaccination in the world. So it's possible. It's possible. Yeah, I'm comparing to countries that are similar to Brazil and that are, I mean, they are much smaller, but they are also not very rich countries, but are respectable countries on the economic scene in the world, and they are doing much better. And this doesn't mean that there would not be no problems. Well, there are problems everywhere. If you look, say, just the U.S., you had problems, but even say, okay, that was Trump. But now look to Europe. Even at the beginning, everybody spoke about Angela Merkel. It's the best, and they have also problems. Okay, because I mean we face a tough enemy, which is the virus. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, but you could do better, much better than we have, and in this sense, I think if we had a different government from any side of the spectrum except the extreme right, which is Bolsonaro, I think it would not be, for instance, maybe the example of the best management, maybe not, but it would be better. I'm pretty much sure of that.
Yeah, because it's not just his direct policies. Would you say it's much more like his rhetoric and the propaganda that he's pushing out into the public more so than his actual policy decisions?
Yeah, I mean, and the lack of policy decisions is also
lack thereof. Yeah.
I mean, and the policy decision of producing chloroquine, Brazil now they don't know what to do with the chloroquine, right? Because they produce so much.
How much was produced?
Well, I don't have the numbers, but
okay.
It's a lot, much more than we could need, and because he engaged the military to produce that, and well, now people are saying, okay, well, why don't you donate because chloroquine is anti-malaria, okay? And why don't you donate this to poor African countries instead of just letting it I mean, in Brazil for nothing. So maybe send it out to poor countries that have malaria incidents, a high malaria incident. So it's like, so these are political, I mean, these were policies which is completely ridiculous policy. And the rest is we don't have other policies. And this is and you put on top of it the rhetoric. So the rhetoric obviously has influence on people. He has followers, and he also creates the doubt. Even if people are not a follower of or not vote for Bolsonaro, but you create this buzzword and this things that the people are saying. Yeah, but there is no consensus about the things in the scientific community because about things that usually have already a certain consensus or at least strong indications. And this also creates this kind of climate, of this kind of atmosphere with a lot of doubts and people talking nonsense because the president talked nonsense.
Right. Gosh. with now with these, you mentioned before some of the cities that have been doing lockdowns and have been starting to have some success. When did they start doing that exactly, or about actually implementing real lockdowns to try to get it under control?
So real lockdowns, let's say, at the very first moment in March, there were no real lockdowns, but the restrictions were tougher than today here, for instance, in São Paulo. If you look around the corner, today you see people and cars, and at that time you didn't see. But it was not a lockdown. You could go out, and some commerce was allowed, but it was already 70% of the lockdown. Now, real lockdowns are only happen locally at certain towns. It's not. There's no state that has a lockdown policy. They have restrictions, and lockdowns happen like this. This small city in the state of São Paulo, where things went to such a point that they had no other choice. So then they had a lockdown, and but I mean that are lockdowns for like a week, 10 days.
Oh, so very very recently this started.
Very recently,
Okay.
January, February, when things really ran out of their management, they could not do anything else because the hospital was already. I mean, there were no beds, and if you got sick, you would not get a bed, and you would not even see a doctor. So you had to really to close it. You have to cut down the transmission, and so some cities have done this, but usually too late. But then they have done it.
Do you think if there's enough success seen from lockdowns in the cities, in some of these smaller cities that you mentioned, like the one small city in Sao Paulo, do you think that could catch on, and that other mayors or even perhaps some governors could start to see what's going on there, and that could create an incentive for them to change their actions?
The point is, what's happened to this city that has a difficult name for English speakers, Araraquara. What happened there is that they locked down. This was already in a city that was seen as an example of good management and of the epidemic. But they waited too long to lock down. And then some cities, and also in São Paulo, or maybe also in other parts of the country. So this medium-sized cities, some of them are considering, but again, the people seem to wait until the last moment, and then the lockdown comes in as a solution that is to avoid the really a super collapse. So, but you see the start of the collapse, then you go there and you lock down. So there's what is really what I don't see is having policies to avoid this situation of collapse, of hospital collapse and healthcare in general at the cities. And so maybe a preventive lockdown could be in order, that would save lives and even help the economic situation, because it would not take so long, let's say 2 or 3 weeks lockdown, and then trying to recover from that. So this kind of thing I don't see happening anywhere. The lockdowns that we see are lockdowns of despair. The mayor gets despaired, and the people get despaired. What can we do? Well, lockdown. Okay? So I have not seen any situation where you really have a policy that tries to avoid this collapse, and lockdowns are introduced only when the collapse starts.
Have you been in touch with anybody lately, trying to get through to somebody, preventative lockdowns? Do you see any success happening there at all?
So I have not been in touch with people. Actually, we have scheduled a seminar, a group from this with the health secretary of this small city in the state for next week. But so we have not been in touch with these people right now. So, but I mean, you look at the numbers and you see, I mean, the lockdown works almost by definition. And if people don't have contacts, then it works. Okay, and the point is obviously then how you get out of this without having a new surge of cases, and then you need to have all these policies of testing and finding the people that had contact with a certain case and so on. And this has not been put in place, at least at large extent in Brazil. So there's no enough testing and looking for people that might be maybe were in contact with somebody who got infected. There's no systematic of this. Maybe some cities can do it. Usually small cities that are rich, but they go there and they by themselves. They have tests and then they try to test people. That's something that can be done. But let's say at the large scale, policies of testing, tracing, contacts, and so on, there's no large scale policy in this respect. There are not even enough tests to do this. And because this would be important if you have a lockdown, but you cannot stay in lockdown forever. And having plans to get out of the lockdown is important. But I have not seen any serious plans of how to get out of the situation, even if you have a successful lockdown.
Has there been a lot of other academics or any medical professionals that have been also pushing for the same sort of thing, like to have lockdowns and to have an actual exit strategy? Is there a lot of that going on in Brazil, trying to influence people?
Yeah, most of academics that are involved with anything connected to epidemiology or public health and so on, scientists and not only scientists, researchers, not only academia. And they are calling for lockdowns. I mean, that's I would say the mainstream of people that are somehow involved with public health policies and research, and not only modeling, but the research among social science researchers that also work with the consequences of the epidemic, and the economists. They are all calling for lockdowns or very strong restrictions. Lockdown is, people don't like to use the word lockdown, but anyhow, it's very strong and protective restrictions and so on. So a lot of people are calling for that. And even mainstream media, mainstream newspapers, even today, one of the mainstream newspapers just had a headline of we are in collapse, we have to lock down. And the main Brazilian TV network is also, well, it is not promoting lockdown. Why a national one? There is the national lockdown or local lockdown. Okay? But they don't promote the idea of national lockdown. They don't say anything. They are not against, but are not in favor either. And but local lockdowns and at some states and cities, that's that even the main TV and networks and are now at least the mainstream thing are now in favor of this hard restrictions, as they say. Then they have a lot of people that, I mean, then there's the media that is that's the Bolsonaro supporters media, which obviously is against anything that you have this also, but no main mainstream TV network is pushing, is aligned with Bolsonaro at this point.
Oh, okay. And throughout the past year, what is the press coverage been like? Was there a lot more support for Bolsonaro in much of the press early on, and has like a lot of the press just been sort of not really being against lockdowns or for it, but just avoiding the topic? Like what has the press been like over the year?
So the relation with the Bolsonaro with the press is very bad. So you have at least the largest TV network. It's completely anti-Bolsonaro. Okay, that would be. I mean, this corresponds to the main networks and ABC or NBC. If they don't even talk to Bolsonaro, but Bolsonaro doesn't give them any interview and forbids the journalists of this media to work at let's say at the palace where he the seat of the executive power. Then are the newspapers, which are all of them. I mean, all the three national newspapers are against Bolsonaro, and pretty much so. And well, then there are subtleties, and then there are some that are more like, but all of them would be like the liberal media or the traditional conservative media or liberal media, which are, I mean, the press in general is against Bolsonaro. Then you have, well, then actually there's one TV network that's more pro Bolsonaro. I forgot. I don't watch it so much. And
not your favorite channel.
And then there are the radios. I mean, radio is still important. Radios, and then you have the radios are, and I mean, you can find anything. But I mean, the mainstream and the big media, it's usually against Bolsonaro, and they are pushing for better policies. Although they obviously have ties to the elite, to the people that run big commerce or industries or finance, and they also express the point of view of these people that sometimes they, for instance, loosening the restrictions too early in Brazil had some support from the media, okay? Because, well, maybe it's not so bad, and this kind of thing. But in respect to Bolsonaro and in the present situation, where you have a very, very dramatic situation, the collapse nearing, then yeah, then the media is pressing Bolsonaro to take action. But well, he doesn't care. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care. He is very strong on social media, and continues to be.
Okay, I guess I think we should probably wrap it up here soon.
Yeah.
But just before I let you go, can you let us know what it's been like just sort of being in Brazil right now, with it's a year in, and the situation's at its absolute worst without question, and the death toll is really high. What's it like for just being a citizen in Brazil and for the other people?
It's very sad. And well, I should say that I'm I have a privilege to be a university professor and work at home. Right? And I've been working a lot. But I think I never worked so much as this time, but I like to work, so that's not a problem. But so going beyond my situation, which is a situation that is easier to manage. When you look at this, you get really sad and really disappointed and disappointed. And it's difficult to say that you are disappointed with Bolsonaro because you didn't expect anything, but disappointed with other people also, that in the health secretaries and people that you expected to raise their voices and are not raising, and also a lot of medical doctors that are completely insane and they go with the chloroquine stories and so on. This were things that you say, I didn't expect this to happen. But now, well, you look at that and you just say it's sad, but I will continue to fight because, well, I do research in something that can be useful for the epidemic war, and so but the sadness continues there, and obviously everybody is all people that I know, they're tired because it's already 1 year at home. Even if you are working, which occupies your mind, if you are working at science, and I like to work in science and so on, but at a certain point, you get tired, and but you have to go on. So, but you look at this and you say, I don't believe this is happening in Brazil, because if you look at the numbers, it's unbelievable. And well, this will leave memories that are sad, and I think the generation that is living this, the younger generation, also will have a different view, a different vision of what Brazil is after this epidemic, if it ever ends.
Yeah, because the imagery coming out of there with the mass graves is pretty severe.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, then there are the visual part, and with the mass graves and the people queuing hours at the office where you register the death of your loved one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that happens very recently in a big city in the south of Brazil. 5 to 6 hours queuing outside on the street in front of the office where you go to. It's a kind of registrar where you go to get the paperwork about the people that died. And so when you see this, it's unbelievable.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Roberto. I really appreciate it. Sure. Can you just tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter or anywhere else online to keep track of you?
So it is not difficult to find me on Twitter. My name is Roberto Kraenkel, and the name Kraenkel is not very common. So it's very easy to, if you Google Roberto Kraenkel, you find me either on Facebook or on my homepage at the university or on Twitter. I don't use so much Facebook. I prefer to be contacted by Twitter. If you go for social media or just send me an email, it's not difficult to find my email on it's just Roberto Kraenkel gmail.com, and there's a professional email, but just type my name. There's no other Roberto Kraenkel in the world.
Well, there we go. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this episode. The music you hear on this show is from the Jeff Lapp Trio out of Montreal. Find them at jefflapp.com. Shout out to Tara for doing the graphics for COVID On Air. A huge thanks to my editor Jeff at Bean Co Studios in Regina, Saskatchewan. Please visit endcoronavirus.org for more information on ECV. Click on Join Us. Through that you can volunteer with ECV, and you can subscribe to our newsletter, which is full of great information shot straight to your inbox from our delightful newsletter editor, Tracy. Also, please check out the blog at ECV, and hats off to Scott, our impeccable blog editor. You can find ECV on Facebook and Instagram and on Twitter at ncovid19. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Farden. It's at MrFarden. Until next time.